So now let's say that the parent has found evidence that their child, their son or their daughter, has been looking at pornography on the internet, or maybe even through some other medium. They've been maybe through television or something, but they've been looking at pornography. Either there's been in one exposure, or they know there's been several exposures to pornography on different occasions, and they found evidence of this in the computer. They found it in the history log, or they found it, maybe they got a covenantized report and they noticed that on the report, and they see that information. Now they wonder, how should I react to this? What should I do about this? I mean, maybe the parents hasn't even had, any good, birds and bees kind of conversations, or any sort of mechanical conversation. What is sex, or what is sexuality? And now their child is seeing this information for the first time in graphic visual form. What can a parent do in that instance? What's the proper way to react, and what kind of information do they need to impart to their son or their daughter?
Yeah, and I'll pick up on part of the question that I think is important. Parents need to be technologically savvy enough that they can check the history.
Yes.
And if the history is set to 0 days, they need to be able to check the cookies.
Yeah.
And if there's no cookies on their computer, they need to know that that's a problem.
Yeah.
And that their kids have gotten savvy enough that they are beginning to cover their tracks. And so that day and age, and I'll show my age a little bit here, when we ask our kids to program our VCR because we don't know how to make it not blink 12, we have to be technologically savvy enough. And again, you can get online and say, how do I check the history? How do I check the cookies? How do I, where are those settings? Marking where your parental controls are so that if they get moved, that your kid's not saying, I had no idea. And you go, well, I guess maybe it moved its. No, parental controls don't move themselves.
Right.
And the whole reason to have this part of the conversation is we want to discover if this is going on before we walk in on our child and the screen's coming down and their hands are moving and it's that awkward in the moment. I am having this conversation because I caught my child doing something, and the embarrassment and shame of that moment. I want to have covenant eyes on the computer so that I get a report that if something questionable is there, and I can think about this conversation before that moment. Mm-hmm. And so the first thing, and in some ways maybe that most important thing, is to not freak out. And it is painful, it is unsettling, it can be angering, it can be fear-provoking to think my child is looking at pornography. And so getting myself in check, talking to a spouse, talking to a youth minister, talking to somebody to go help me think through this conversation. After that, I want to do a little bit of research. I want to, whatever search engine that they may be using, I want to go to that search engine and just type one letter at a time, A. What comes underneath that may have been searched for under the letter A that lets me know what was my child looking for? Did they hear a crude word for sexuality at their school and they looked it up and that's where they got the information?
Or maybe did it autofill or something like that? Did it?
Right.
Right. Okay.
And I use the autofill, which generally goes back to the most recent searches on my computer.
Sure.
Did they see a banner for Hooters, and that's what they went for? Did they do they have a crush on a cheerleader, and they typed cheerleader? It gives me something that as I go into this conversation, and I'm pretty sure I'm going to hear the words I don't know 36 times, that if I can ask a more leading, prompting question that says, I saw one of the things that you were searching for was about cheerleaders. What was it that gave you interest about that? That they don't have to be as volunteering of information. I can set a tone that says this is a safe conversation. I didn't say that in some awkward, overbearing way. That they don't know how I'm going to respond. I give them some of my tone to what they were looking for in the early part of that conversation.